The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the dusty ranch house, and Natalie Dawson gripped the wooden seat beneath her fingers, waiting for the driver to announce their arrival in a place she would never see. She had traveled 3 weeks from Boston to San Diego, California, carrying nothing but a worn leather satchel, a heart full of hope, and the darkness that had been her companion since fever took her sight at age 12. Now, at 22, she was about to meet the rancher who had answered her advertisement, the man who had written that blindness did not diminish her worth, the man whose words on paper had made her believe in second chances. "Miss Dawson, we have arrived at the Hollister Ranch," the driver called out, his boots hitting the packed earth as he came around to help her down. Natalie stood carefully, her hands finding the door frame, her feet testing each step before committing her weight. The California sun warmed her face, so different from the cold Boston springs she remembered from childhood. The air smelled of sage and horses, and something sweet she could not name. She heard footsteps approaching, heavy boots on hard ground, and then they stopped a few feet away. "Miss Dawson." The voice was deeper than she had imagined, rough around the edges but not unkind. "I am Preston Hollister." She turned toward the sound, her hand extended in the general direction of his voice. "Mr. Hollister, thank you for having me travel all this way. I hope I have not made a mistake in coming." His hand took hers, large and calloused, warm from the sun. He held it gently, as though she were made of porcelain. "The only mistake would have been if you had not come. I meant every word I wrote in my letters." "Then you truly do not mind that I cannot see?" The question escaped before she could stop it, the fear that had ridden with her every mile from Boston finally finding its voice. Preston did not release her hand. Instead, his other hand came up to cover hers, creating a cocoon of warmth and safety. "Miss Dawson, I told you in my last letter, if you will have me, then let me be your eyes and your heart. This ranch, this life I have built here, it means nothing if there is no one to share it with. Your blindness does not change that you are educated, kind, and brave enough to travel across a continent to meet a stranger. Those are the things that matter." Natalie felt tears prick at her eyes, hot and unexpected. In Boston, she had been a burden to her aging aunt, pitied by neighbors, dismissed by potential suitors who saw only her affliction. But this man, this rancher in the wild California territory, spoke to her as though she were whole. "Then I am glad I came," she said softly. "Let me show you the house," Preston said, and she felt his arm extend. She slipped her hand into the crook of his elbow, noting the solid muscle beneath the worn cotton of his shirt. He was a working man, she could tell, not soft like the Boston merchants her aunt had tried to interest in her. They walked slowly, and Preston began to describe everything. "We are walking up 3 wooden steps now. The porch wraps around the front and east side of the house. I built it 5 years ago when I first claimed this land. The house faces west, toward the mountains, though those are a good 20 miles away. To our left is the barn, red paint that is fading now, needs another coat. To the right is the corral where I keep the horses. I have 6 now, all good working animals." His voice painted pictures in her mind, and Natalie found herself smiling. They entered the house, and the air changed, cooler, smelling of wood and coffee and something baking. "Mr. Hollister, is that you bringing the young lady?" A woman's voice, older, friendly. "Yes, Martha." "This is Miss Natalie Dawson." "Natalie, this is Martha Cooper. She is the wife of my foreman, Jack Cooper. She helps with the cooking and has prepared a room for you. Miss Dawson, welcome." Martha's hands took Natalie's, and they were soft, a woman's hands that knew both hard work and gentleness. "I have made a roast for dinner, and there are fresh biscuits. You must be exhausted from your journey." "I am tired," Natalie admitted, but more nervous than anything else. "Well, you have nothing to be nervous about here," Martha said firmly. "Mr. Hollister is a good man, and this is a good home. Let me show you to your room so you can rest before dinner." Preston released her arm, and Martha took over, guiding Natalie through the house with the same careful descriptions. "We are in the main room now. Large fireplace on the north wall, Preston's desk by the window. Now we turn right down a hallway. Your room is the first door on the left, Preston's is at the end of the hall. Mine and Jack's cabin is out behind the barn." The room smelled fresh, like lavender and clean linens. Martha guided her to the bed, helped her understand the layout, where the washstand stood, where the wardrobe was placed, where the window looked out on what Martha described as the eastern pasture. "I will let you rest, dear. Dinner is at 6. Preston will come fetch you." When Martha left, Natalie sat on the bed and let out a long breath. She had done it. She had actually left Boston, traveled across the country, and arrived at this ranch in California. She had met Preston Hollister, and he had not sent her back. His words echoed in her mind. "Let me be your eyes and your heart." She lay back on the bed, meaning only to rest her eyes out of habit, though darkness was all she ever saw. Sleep took her quickly, born of exhaustion and relief. A gentle knock woke her some time later. "Miss Dawson, it is Preston. Martha says dinner is ready if you are feeling up to it." Natalie sat up quickly, smoothing her dress, touching her hair to make sure her pins were still in place. "Yes, I am sorry. I did not mean to sleep so long. You traveled 3 weeks by stage. You have nothing to apologize for." She found her way to the door, opened it, and Preston was there. She could hear his breathing, steady and calm, could smell horse and leather and the outdoors that clung to him. "May I take your arm?" she asked. "Always." They walked to the dining room together, and Preston described everything again. The table was oak, handmade by a carpenter in San Diego. 6 chairs surrounded it, though tonight only 4 would be filled. The room had windows on 2 walls, and through them came the last of the day's light, though Preston did not mention that, realizing perhaps that such details meant nothing to her. Jack Cooper stood when they entered, and his voice was gruff but welcoming. "Miss Dawson. Good to have a young lady on the ranch. Been telling Preston for years he needed to find himself a wife." "Jack, do not embarrass her," Martha scolded, but there was laughter in her voice. Dinner was roast beef, potatoes, carrots, fresh biscuits with butter and honey. Preston sat beside Natalie and quietly, discreetly, described where each item was on her plate, using the face of a clock as reference. "Meat at 6, potatoes at 2, carrots at 10. He did it so naturally, so quietly, that the Coopers did not seem to notice, and Natalie was grateful for his thoughtfulness. The conversation flowed easily. Jack talked about the cattle, the 100 head they had now, hoping to increase the herd next spring. Martha talked about her garden, the vegetables that grew so well in the California soil. Preston talked about the ranch, his plans to build a bigger barn, to dig a proper well closer to the house. "What about you, Miss Dawson?" Martha asked. "Tell us about Boston." Natalie set down her fork carefully. "I grew up there, though I have not been able to see it since I was 12. I lost my sight to a fever. My parents died when I was 16, and I went to live with my aunt. She was kind, but I was a burden to her, another mouth to feed, a niece who could not help much around the house. When I turned 21, I decided I wanted more than to be a burden. I wanted a life, a purpose, so I placed an advertisement. That took courage," Preston said quietly. "Or desperation," Natalie replied honestly. "I did not know which at the time, but I hoped for courage." "It was courage," Preston said firmly. "You are here, are you not? You got on a stage alone and traveled across the country to meet a stranger. That is the definition of courage." After dinner, Preston asked if she would like to sit on the porch, and Natalie agreed. The night air was cooler but still pleasant, and the sounds were unlike anything she had known in Boston. Crickets sang, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. The cattle lowed softly from the pasture and horses moved restlessly in the corral. "It is beautiful here," she said. "I can hear it, smell it. Everything is so open, so alive." "It is wild," Preston agreed. "When I first came here from Texas 7 years ago, this was just open land. I was 23 and had saved enough money working cattle drives to buy my own claim. I built the house with my own hands, started the herd with 10 head. It has been hard work, but it is mine. Ours, if you decide to stay." "You mentioned in your letters that we would have a courtship period," Natalie said carefully. "That we would not marry immediately." "Yes, I want you to be sure. This is a hard life, Natalie. I work from dawn until dark most days. The house is comfortable but not fancy. We are 20 miles from San Diego, and the trip takes half a day by wagon. In winter, storms can make it impossible to travel for days at a time. I want you to understand what you would be agreeing to." "And I want you to understand what you would be agreeing to," Natalie replied. "I cannot see. I can cook, but someone must set things out for me at first until I learn where everything is kept. I can clean, sew, tend a garden if shown where the plants are. But I will need help, Preston. I will need patience. You would not have a normal wife." Preston was quiet for a long moment, and Natalie held her breath, waiting for him to realize his mistake, to admit that blindness was more than he had bargained for. "Natalie," he said finally, and his voice was closer. He had moved his chair nearer to hers. "I am 30 years old. I have worked hard every day of my adult life. I have built something here, something I am proud of. But at night, when I sit on this porch alone, I feel the emptiness. I do not want a normal wife. I want a partner. I want someone to talk to share this with. You are educated. Your letters were well written, thoughtful. You have a mind and opinions. That is what I want. As for the rest, we will figure it out together. You make it sound simple. It is simple. The hard part is everything else, the drought years, the cattle prices, the work that never ends. But having someone to face it with, that is simple. That is what I want." Natalie felt her heart beat faster. She reached out tentatively, and Preston met her halfway, taking her hand in his. "Then I would like to stay. I would like to have a courtship and see if we suit each other." "I think we will suit each other just fine," Preston said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. The next morning, Martha came to help Natalie dress and showed her to the kitchen. "Preston is already out working," Martha explained. "He rises before dawn most days. But he left instructions that I should help you learn the house if you are willing." "I am very willing," Natalie said. "I want to be useful." They spent the morning walking through the house, room by room. Martha described everything in detail, and then guided Natalie's hands so she could feel the furniture, the walls, the windows. In the kitchen, Martha showed her where the dishes were kept, where the dry goods were stored, where the pots and pans hung. She let Natalie feel the stove, still warm from breakfast, and explained how Preston kept the wood box filled. "You will learn this," Martha said confidently. "It will take time, but you will learn it. I have seen blind folks do remarkable things. There was a man in my hometown who was blind and ran a general store. Knew where every single item was kept, could make change faster than anyone with sight. You just need time and practice." By midday, Natalie had a rough map of the house in her mind. She knew that 20 steps from her bedroom door brought her to the main room. From there, another 15 steps straight ahead led to the kitchen. The dining room opened off the kitchen to the right. Preston's office was to the left of the main room. It was a start. Preston came in for lunch, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. "How is the morning going?" he asked. "Martha is a wonderful teacher," Natalie said. "I am learning the house. Good. After lunch, if you would like, I thought I could show you the barn and the animals, unless you are too tired." "I am not too tired," Natalie said quickly. She wanted to learn everything to prove that she could be the partner Preston hoped for. After lunch, Preston took her outside. The sun was high and hot, and Natalie was grateful for the bonnet Martha had insisted she wear. Preston guided her carefully across the yard, describing the layout as they walked. "The barn is straight ahead from the front porch, about 100 yards. The corral is to the right of the barn. The bunkhouse where the 2 hired hands sleep is beyond that. The cooper's cabin is behind the barn to the left. The chicken coop is near the house on the east side, and Martha's garden is just beyond that." They reached the barn, and Preston led her inside. The smell of hay and horses was strong but not unpleasant. Natalie could hear animals moving, the soft sounds of them breathing and eating. "There are 6 stalls on each side," Preston explained. "The tack room is at the far end. My horse, Duke, is in the first stall on the right." They approached the stall, and Preston took Natalie's hand. "Hold it flat like this," he said, positioning her hand palm up. "Duke, come here, boy." The horse moved closer, and Natalie felt warm breath on her palm, then the soft velvet of the horse's nose. She gasped with delight and let Preston guide her hand to stroke Duke's face. "He is beautiful, is he not?" Preston asked. "I imagine he is," Natalie said softly, running her hand down the horse's neck, feeling the strong muscles, the sleek coat. "He feels powerful. He is best horse I have ever owned. I bought him as a colt and trained him myself. He is steady, smart, and strong." They moved down the row, and Preston introduced her to each horse, telling her their names and personalities. There was Molly, the gentle mare that Martha sometimes rode. There was Thunder, the big gelding that pulled the wagon. There was Star, a young horse Preston was training. Each one had a story, and Preston told them all with obvious affection for the animals. "You ride?" Preston asked as they left the barn. "I did before I lost my sight. I have not been on a horse in 10 years. Would you like to try again?" "I could take you riding, keep you safe." Natalie hesitated. The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. "I do not know. Maybe someday when I am more settled here." "Whenever you are ready," Preston said. "There is no rush." They walked back to the house, and Preston was called away by Jack to deal with a problem in the south pasture. Natalie spent the afternoon with Martha, learning to peel potatoes by feel, to knead bread dough, to shell peas. The work was slow at first, but Natalie found she enjoyed it. She was being useful, contributing, and that felt good. Over the next week, a routine developed. Preston rose early and worked until lunch. He would come in dusty and tired, wash up, and eat with Natalie and usually the Coopers. After lunch, he would spend an hour or 2 with Natalie, showing her more of the ranch, talking with her, simply being present. Then he would return to work until dinner. Evenings were spent on the porch, talking under the stars that Natalie could not see but could feel in the cool night air and hear in Preston's descriptions. Preston told her about his childhood in Texas, growing up on a small ranch with 2 brothers and a sister. He talked about losing his father to a horse accident when Preston was 18, about helping his mother keep the ranch going for 2 years before his older brother took over, and Preston set out to make his own way. He talked about the cattle drives, the hard months on the trail, the dangers and adventures. He talked about seeing California for the first time and knowing this was where he wanted to build his life. Natalie told him about Boston, about her parents who had run a bookshop, about growing up surrounded by books and learning. She talked about the fever that had taken her sight, the terrifying weeks of pain and confusion, the slow acceptance that the darkness was permanent. She talked about learning to navigate the world without sight, the frustration and small victories. She talked about her aunt, a kind woman overwhelmed by her own life, who had done her best, but had no idea how to help a blind girl become an independent woman. "I learned to read with my fingers," Natalie said one evening. "There is a system, raised dots that represent letters. A man named Louis Braille invented it in France. My aunt found a teacher who knew the system and she taught me. I read everything I could find. It saved me, I think, having that connection to the world of ideas and stories." "Do you have books with you?" Preston asked. "A few. They are in my trunk, which arrived last week on the freight wagon. Would you read to me sometime? I would like to hear what you like to read." Natalie smiled, touched by his interest. "I would like that very much." As the days turned into weeks, Natalie grew more confident in the house. She could navigate from room to room without help now. She could find the dishes, prepare simple meals, do the washing up. Martha was patient and encouraging, always there if Natalie needed help, but giving her space to figure things out on her own. Preston continued to spend time with her every day, and Natalie found herself looking forward to those hours more than anything else. He was kind and patient, never making her feel like a burden. He described the world to her in vivid detail, painting pictures with his words. He told her about the golden hills in the summer heat, about the way the mountains turned purple at sunset, about the storms that rolled in from the ocean, bringing rain and lightning. One afternoon, about 6 weeks after Natalie's arrival, Preston asked if she would like to take a walk beyond the immediate ranch yard. "There is a creek about half a mile from here," he said. "It is a pretty spot, and the walk is not too difficult. Would you like to go?" "Yes," Natalie said immediately. She had been feeling restless, confined to the house and barn area. The idea of exploring farther was exciting. They set out after lunch, Preston guiding her carefully over the uneven ground. He warned her about rocks and dips, about sagebrush and low cactus. The sun was hot, but a breeze kept it bearable. Birds called from somewhere above, and Natalie could hear the distant lowing of cattle. "Tell me what you see," she said as they walked. Preston was quiet for a moment, then began to speak. "The land rolls here, not flat but not quite hills. It is golden brown now in the summer heat, but in spring after the rains it turns green almost overnight. Wildflowers bloom, orange poppies and purple lupine and yellow mustard. It is like the whole world catches fire with color. The grass is dry now, crunches under our feet. There are oak trees scattered across the landscape, their branches twisted and dark against the sky. To the west, the mountains rise up, blue and purple in the distance. To the east is the ocean, though we cannot see it from here. It is about 15 miles away. I have been there a few times. The water is so blue it does not look real, and the waves crash against the rocks with a sound like thunder. I would like to hear the ocean someday," Natalie said wistfully. "Then I will take you. We can make a trip to San Diego, stay a few days. You can hear the ocean and feel the sand and smell the salt air. You would do that, Natalie. I would do anything to make you happy." They reached the creek, and Natalie could hear the water bubbling over rocks. Preston guided her to a large, flat stone near the water's edge and helped her sit. The stone was warm from the sun, and the sound of the water was soothing. "This is my favorite place on the ranch," Preston said, sitting beside her. "I come here when I need to think, to get away from the work for a little while. It is peaceful." "It is," Natalie agreed. She reached out tentatively toward the sound of the water, and Preston took her hand, guiding it to the creek. The water was cold and clear, running fast over her fingers. "Natalie," Preston said, and his voice was different, more serious. "I know we agreed to a courtship period. I know you have only been here 6 weeks, but I need to tell you something." Natalie's heart began to beat faster. She pulled her hand from the water and turned toward him. "What is it?" "I am falling in love with you," Preston said simply. "I do not know when it happened exactly. Maybe it was when I read your first letter and saw the courage in your words. Maybe it was when you stepped off that stage and held your head high even though you were terrified. Maybe it was during our evenings on the porch, talking about everything and nothing. But it has happened and I cannot pretend otherwise." Natalie felt tears spring to her eyes. "Preston, you do not have to say anything," he interrupted gently. "I am not asking for an answer. I just wanted you to know. I wanted to be honest with you. I said I would be your eyes and your heart, and I meant it. But my heart is becoming yours, Natalie, whether you want it or not." "Preston," Natalie said, her voice shaking, "I am falling in love with you too. I think I have been since the first letter you sent, when you wrote that my blindness did not diminish my worth. No one has ever said that to me before. Everyone else saw my blindness first and me second, but you have always seen me first." Preston took both her hands in his. "Then marry me, Natalie, not because of any advertisement or arrangement, but because we love each other. Marry me and let me spend the rest of my life being your eyes and your heart, and you can be mine." "Yes," Natalie whispered. "Yes, Preston, I will marry you." Preston pulled her close, and Natalie felt his arms around her, strong and warm and safe. She felt his heart beating against her cheek, heard his ragged breath, and knew this was where she belonged. When he pulled back slightly, she felt his hand cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away the tears that had fallen. "May I kiss you?" he asked softly. "Yes," she breathed. His lips met hers, gentle at first, then deeper as she responded. It was Natalie's first kiss, and it was everything she had imagined and more. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "I love you, Natalie Dawson," Preston said. "I love you, Preston Hollister," she replied. They were married 2 weeks later in San Diego. The ceremony was small, attended by the Coopers, a few neighboring ranchers Preston knew, and the minister who had baptized Preston when he first arrived in California. Natalie wore a simple white dress that Martha had helped her sew, and Preston wore his best suit, brushed clean of dust for the occasion. Natalie could not see the church or the flowers or the faces of the people who wished them well. But she could hear the joy in Preston's voice when he said his vows. She could feel the strength of his hands holding hers. She could smell the wildflowers someone had placed around the church. And when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, she could feel the rightness of it in her bones. After the ceremony, they had a meal at the hotel in San Diego, and then Preston surprised her. "I have booked us a room for the night," he said. "And tomorrow, I am taking you to the ocean like I promised." That night in the hotel room, with the sounds of the town settling down outside their window, Preston and Natalie began their life together as husband and wife. He was gentle and patient, guiding her through the experience with the same care he had shown her in everything else. And Natalie, who had spent 10 years living in darkness, felt more seen and cherished than ever before in her life. The next morning, they rode in a rented carriage to the coast. Preston described the landscape as they traveled, the way the land changed from rolling hills to coastal bluffs, the way the air grew cooler and saltier the closer they got. And then they were there, and Natalie could hear it, the roar of the waves crashing against the shore. Preston helped her down from the carriage and guided her across the sand. It shifted under her feet, soft and warm, so different from anything she had walked on before. They reached the water's edge and a wave rushed up, covering her feet in cold foam. She gasped and laughed, and Preston laughed with her. They spent hours there, walking along the beach, sitting in the sand, listening to the endless rhythm of the ocean. Preston described the pelicans diving for fish, the seals sunning themselves on rocks, the way the water stretched out to meet the sky. And Natalie stored every word, every sensation, creating a picture in her mind of this place where earth met sea. "Thank you," she said as they sat together, the waves washing over their feet. "Thank you for bringing me here, for describing it all to me. Thank you for making me feel like I am not missing anything, even though I cannot see." "You are not missing anything," Preston said firmly. "You experience the world differently, that is all. And you help me see things I would have overlooked. You taught me to listen to the sounds of the ranch at night, to appreciate the feeling of the sun, to notice the smell of the earth after rain. You have given me as much as I have given you." They returned to the ranch the next day, and life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Natalie took over more of the household duties, and Martha gradually stepped back, though she still came to help with the heavier work and to provide company. Natalie learned to bake bread that Preston declared the best he had ever tasted. She learned to mend his work shirts, to tend the garden, to care for the chickens. Preston taught her to navigate the ranch, not just the house. He showed her the paths to the barn, to the corral, to the cooper's cabin. He taught her to recognize the different horses by their sounds and smells. He even, eventually, convinced her to ride again. He put her on Molly, the gentle mare, and led them around the corral while Natalie clung to the saddle horn and tried to remember how riding had felt 10 years ago. Eventually, the fear faded and the joy returned. Preston would take her riding across the ranch, describing the landscape, letting her feel the wind in her face and the power of the horse beneath her. Summer turned to fall, and the heat gave way to cooler days and the first rains. Natalie loved the rain, the way it smelled, the sound of it on the roof, the freshness it brought to the air. Preston loved watching her stand on the porch during storms, her face turned up to feel the drops, a smile of pure contentment on her lips. "You are so beautiful," he told her one such evening, and she blushed. "You cannot possibly think that. You have never told me what I look like, and I have not asked, but I know I am plain." "You are not plain," Preston said, pulling her close. "You have dark hair that catches the light, even though you cannot see it. You have brown eyes that look right at me even though they cannot see me. You have a smile that lights up your whole face, and even if you were plain, which you are not, it would not matter. You are beautiful to me because of who you are, not what you look like." Winter came, and with it the storms Preston had warned her about. For 3 days in January, rain poured down and the creek flooded its banks. They were confined to the house, and Preston worried about the cattle. But Natalie kept him company, reading to him from her books, playing card games she had modified so she could feel the markings, simply talking and being together. When the storm finally broke, Preston went out to assess the damage. They had lost 2 head of cattle to the flooding, and part of the fence line was down. It took a week of hard work to repair everything, and Preston came home exhausted every night. But Natalie was always there, with hot food and warm arms and words of encouragement. Spring came, and with it the wildflowers Preston had described. He picked bouquets for her, and though she could not see the colors, she could smell their sweetness and feel their delicate petals. The ranch came alive with new calves and foals, and Preston brought Natalie to the barn to feel the newborn animals, to marvel at their softness and strength. One evening in late April, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset that Natalie could not see, she took Preston's hand and placed it on her stomach. "I have something to tell you," she said. Preston went very still. "Natalie, I am with child. Martha helped me confirm it. The baby should come in the fall, probably October." Preston let out a whoop of joy and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around until she was laughing and dizzy. "A baby," he kept saying. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Natalie asked, though she knew the answer. Happy does not begin to cover it, Preston said. You have made me the happiest man alive, Natalie Hollister. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer. Natalie felt strong and healthy, and Martha was there to guide her through the changes in her body and what to expect. Preston became even more protective, insisting she not overwork, making sure she rested every afternoon. He would sit with her in the evenings, his hand on her growing belly, talking to the baby about the ranch and the life they would have together. If it is a boy, I want to name him after your father, Preston said one night. If that is all right with you. Natalie felt tears sting her eyes. Her father had been named Nathan, a good, strong name. I would love that, and if it is a girl, I would like to name her after your mother. Patricia, Preston said softly. My mother would have loved you, Natalie. She would have been so happy to know I found you. In mid-October, the pains began. Martha sent Jack to fetch the doctor from San Diego while she helped Natalie through the labor. Preston paced outside as men were expected to do, but Natalie called for him anyway. I want him here, she told Martha firmly. I want my husband with me. Preston came in, pale and frightened, but he took Natalie's hand and did not leave her side. He whispered words of encouragement, wiped the sweat from her face and held her through the pain. And when the baby finally came, screaming and healthy, it was Preston who placed their son in Natalie's arms. A boy, the doctor announced. Strong and healthy. Congratulations. Natalie felt the tiny weight of her son, the warmth of him, the perfect smallness of his fingers and toes. Tears streamed down her face as she cradled him close. Nathan, she whispered. Our Nathan. He has dark hair like you, Preston said, his voice choked with emotion. And he is perfect, Natalie. Absolutely perfect. Little Nathan became the center of their world. Natalie cared for him with a skill that surprised even herself. She learned to recognize his different cries, to know when he was hungry or tired or needed changing. She learned to bathe him by touch, to dress him, to soothe him when he fussed. Preston would describe their son's features as they changed, the way his eyes went from newborn blue to brown like Natalie's, the way his hair grew thicker, the first smile, the first tooth. The ranch continued to prosper. That spring, they increased the herd to 150 head. Preston hired another hand to help with the work. They talked about building an addition to the house, adding more bedrooms for the children they hoped to have. Nathan grew into a bright, curious toddler. By the time he was 2, he understood that his mother could not see, but he did not think of it as strange. It was simply how his mother was. He would take her hand and guide her to see something interesting, describing it in his simple toddler words. Bird, mama, pretty bird. Or flower, smell flower. When Nathan was 3, Natalie discovered she was expecting again. This pregnancy was harder than the first. She was often tired and sick, and Preston worried constantly. But Natalie was strong, and in the summer, they welcomed a daughter into the world. They named her Patricia as they had planned, but called her Patty. Patty had Preston's blonde hair and Natalie's brown eyes. She was a calm, content baby, so different from Nathan, who had always been active and curious. Preston would hold her on the porch in the evenings, describing the sunset to both Natalie and the baby, as if teaching her to see the world the way he saw it. Life settled into a beautiful routine. The children grew, the ranch prospered, and Preston and Natalie's love deepened with each passing year. They had challenges, of course. There were drought years when the grass was scarce, and they had to sell off part of the herd. There were storms and injuries and illnesses. There were the normal trials of raising children and running a ranch. But through it all, Preston kept his promise. He was Natalie's eyes, describing the world to her in vivid detail. He described their children's faces, the way Nathan looked so serious when he was concentrating, the way Patty dimpled when she smiled. He described the changing seasons, the land they loved, the life they had built together, and Natalie was Preston's heart. She reminded him to slow down, to appreciate the small moments. She read to him in the evenings, taught the children to read, filled the house with music and laughter. She showed him that strength came in many forms, that blindness was not weakness, that love was not about perfection but about acceptance and partnership. When Nathan was 10 and Patty was 7, Preston took the family on a trip to the ocean. They stayed in San Diego for 3 days, and Preston taught the children to swim in the waves while Natalie sat on the beach, listening to their laughter, feeling the sun on her face and the sand between her toes. "Are you happy?" Preston asked her one evening as they walked along the beach, the children running ahead. "I am more than happy," Natalie replied. "I am complete. You gave me a life I never thought I could have. You gave me love and children and purpose. You gave me everything." "You gave me everything too," Preston said, pulling her close. "You took a lonely rancher and gave him a family. You took a house and made it a home. You taught me what it means to truly see someone, to look beyond the surface to the heart underneath." The years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and challenges. Nathan grew into a tall, serious young man who wanted to run the ranch someday. Patty became a teacher in San Diego, married a good man, and gave Preston and Natalie their first grandchildren. The ranch continued to grow, becoming one of the most successful in the region. Preston's hair turned gray, and Natalie's face gained lines, but their love never diminished. They still sat on the porch every evening, talking and holding hands. Preston still described everything to Natalie, though after so many years she could picture the ranch perfectly in her mind. And Natalie still read to Preston, though his eyes were growing dim and he needed her words more than ever. When they were both in their 60s, Preston fell ill. The doctor said his heart was giving out, that there was nothing to be done but make him comfortable. Natalie refused to leave his side. She sat by his bed, holding his hand, reading to him, talking about their life together. "I am not afraid," Preston told her one evening. "I have had a good life, a full life. You gave me that, Natalie." "And you gave it to me," Natalie replied, tears streaming down her face. "You kept your promise, Preston. You were my eyes and my heart every day of our life together." "And you were mine," Preston said weakly. "You still are. You always will be." But Preston rallied. The doctor was surprised, but Natalie was not. Preston was stubborn, always had been. He was not ready to leave her yet, and his will was strong. He recovered slowly, and though he was never quite as strong as he had been, he lived another 10 years. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary surrounded by family. Nathan and his wife, their 3 children. Patty and her husband, their 4 children. The house was full of noise and laughter and love. Preston and Natalie sat in the midst of it all, holding hands, listening to the life they had created. "You remember," Preston said to Natalie that evening after everyone had gone home, "the day you arrived. You were so scared, so unsure, and I promised to be your eyes and your heart." "I remember," Natalie said, squeezing his hand, "and you kept that promise every single day." "It was easy," Preston said. "Loving you was the easiest thing I ever did." Preston passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 75. Natalie grieved deeply but not hopelessly. She knew they would meet again someday. She lived another 5 years, spending her time with her children and grandchildren, teaching them to see the world not just with their eyes but with their hearts. She died on a spring morning, surrounded by wildflowers that Nathan had picked for her. Her last words were, "Preston, I am coming. Wait for me." They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. The headstones were simple, but Nathan insisted on adding an inscription beneath their names and dates. It read, "He was her eyes, she was his heart." Together, they saw everything. The ranch stayed in the family for generations. Nathan's children and grandchildren worked the land, raised cattle, and told stories about the grandparents who had started it all. They told about the mail-order bride who was blind and the rancher who promised to be her eyes and her heart. They told about a love that overcame every obstacle, that saw beyond disability to the person underneath, that proved that sight was not necessary to truly see. And on spring mornings, when the wildflowers bloomed in orange and purple and yellow, when the air was sweet and the sky was blue, the family would gather on the hill where Preston and Natalie were buried. They would sit in the grass and tell the stories again, making sure each new generation knew about the love that had built their family, the love that had seen everything that mattered. The old house still stood, weathered and sturdy, a testament to Preston's skilled hands. The barn he had built still sheltered horses and cattle. The creek still ran clear and cold, the same creek where Preston had told Natalie he loved her for the first time. And if you sat quietly on the porch on a warm evening, you could almost hear them there, Preston's low voice describing the sunset, Natalie's soft laugh, the sound of two hearts beating as one. The land rolled on, golden in summer, green in spring, peaceful under winter rains. The mountains still rose blue and purple in the distance. The ocean still roared against the coast 15 miles away. And the legacy of Preston and Natalie Hollister lived on in every person who knew their story, in every heart that understood that love was not about perfection, but about seeing each other truly, deeply, completely. Their children passed the story to their children, who passed it to theirs. The details became legend, embellished perhaps, but the core truth remained. A woman who could not see came to California seeking a new life. A man who could see promised to be her eyes. And together, they found that the most important kind of sight had nothing to do with eyes at all. It was the sight of two souls recognizing each other, of two hearts beating in perfect harmony, of two lives intertwining to create something beautiful and lasting and true. Nathan's oldest son eventually took over the ranch when Nathan grew too old to manage it. He was named Preston Nathan Hollister, carrying both his grandfather's and father's names forward. He married a woman named Sarah, who had also heard the story of Preston and Natalie, and who believed in that kind of love. Preston Nathan expanded the ranch further, buying adjacent land as it became available. He modernized some operations, but kept the heart of the ranch the same. He taught his own children the values his great-grandfather had lived by: hard work, honesty, kindness, and the understanding that every person had value regardless of any disability or difference. The Hollister family became known throughout California, not just for their successful ranch, but for their generosity and community involvement. They funded a school for blind children in San Diego, established in Natalie's memory. They supported veterans who returned from wars with injuries, giving them jobs on the ranch and teaching them that they still had worth and purpose. Every year on the anniversary of Preston and Natalie's wedding, the family held a celebration at the ranch. Friends and neighbors came from miles around. There was food and music and dancing. And as the sun set, painting the California sky in golds and purples and reds, the family would gather on the hill where Preston and Natalie rested. Someone would read the story again, the true story of how it all began, making sure it was never forgotten. The youngest children would ask questions. Was Grandma Natalie really blind? Did Grandpa Preston really describe everything to her? Did they really love each other that much? And the older generation would answer yes, yes, and yes. They would explain that love was not just a feeling but a choice, made every day. Preston chose to see Natalie not as disabled but as capable, intelligent, and strong. Natalie chose to trust Preston, to be vulnerable, to build a life with a stranger who became everything. Together they chose partnership over independence, communication over assumption, and patience over frustration. As decades passed and the 20th century gave way to the 21st, the ranch adapted to new times but never lost its soul. The old house was carefully maintained, each repair done with respect for the original structure. The barn was reinforced but not replaced. The land was managed with modern techniques but with an eye toward sustainability and the long view, the way Preston had always operated. The story of Preston and Natalie was written down, compiled from family letters and diaries and oral histories. It was published as a small book that the family sold at local shops in San Diego, with all proceeds going to charities that served people with disabilities. The book found its way across the country, touching hearts, inspiring readers, reminding people that love could transcend any barrier if both people were willing to work at it. Visitors sometimes came to the ranch, asking to see where the famous story took place. The family was welcoming, giving tours, showing the house and barn, walking people to the creek and the hill. They wanted people to know that this was not just a fairy tale but a real story about real people who faced real challenges and overcame them through love and commitment. The inscription on the headstones became famous in its own right. He was her eyes, she was his heart. Together they saw everything. It was quoted at weddings, printed on anniversary cards, shared on social media by people who believed in that kind of love. It became a symbol of what partnership should be. Two people complementing each other, supporting each other, becoming more together than they could ever be apart. Time moved forward as it always does. The California landscape changed, growing more populated, more developed. But the Hollister Ranch remained, an oasis of the old ways, a reminder of a time when promises meant everything and love was built on action, not just words. And through it all, the spirits of Preston and Natalie seemed to linger. Workers on the ranch would swear they sometimes heard voices on the porch in the evening, a man's low rumble and a woman's soft laugh. Children playing in the yard would talk about the nice lady who helped them find wildflowers, though no one else saw her. Horses in the barn would whinny softly at nothing, as if greeting an old friend. The family did not speak much about these experiences, did not want to sound foolish or superstitious. But they knew in their hearts that Preston and Natalie had never really left. How could they? This ranch was their legacy, their love made tangible in wood and stone and land. This was where they had built their life, raised their children, grown old together. This was home, and home was where they would always be. As the family gathered on the hill for what would be the 150th anniversary of Preston and Natalie's wedding, the current generation looked at the headstones and felt the weight of history and love pressing down. They had so much to be grateful for, all of it stemming from the courage of one blind woman who got on a stage in Boston, and the compassion of one lonely rancher who saw beyond disability to the person beneath. The sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant colors that Preston had described to Natalie so many times over the years. A breeze moved through the grass, carrying the scent of wildflowers and sage. A hawk cried somewhere in the distance, and cattle lowed from the pasture below. The youngest member of the family, a little girl named Natalie Patricia, just 5 years old, asked her father, "Will I find love like that someday?" Her father smiled and knelt down beside her. "If you are brave and kind and willing to see people for who they really are, then yes, I believe you will." Was great-great-grandma scared when she came here? I think she was terrified, but she was brave enough to come anyway, and great-great-grandpa was patient enough to help her feel safe. That is what love is, sweetie. Being brave enough to be vulnerable and patient enough to let someone else be vulnerable too. The little girl nodded, not quite understanding all the words but grasping the feeling behind them. She reached out and touched the headstone, tracing the letters of her namesake's name with small fingers. "I love you, great-great-grandma," she whispered. And if you believed in such things, you might have heard a whisper in return, carried on the wind, soft and sure. "I love you too, little one. Live bravely, love deeply, see with your heart." The family descended the hill as darkness fell, lights coming on in the old house, welcoming them home. The ranch settled into night, peaceful and content, watched over by the stars and the spirits of two people who had proved that love truly could see everything, even in the dark. And that was the story of Preston Hollister and Natalie Dawson, the rancher and the mail-order bride, the man who promised to be her eyes and her heart, and the woman who trusted him enough to let him try. Their love story became legend, but it had begun as something simple and real. Two people willing to take a chance on each other, to see past obstacles to possibility, to build a life one day at a time with patience and commitment and unwavering devotion. They had seen everything that mattered. And their legacy would live on, generation after generation, a testament to the enduring power of love that sees not with eyes but with the heart.